All right. Hello, everybody. Nice to have so many people on the call. My name is Hillary Amster. I'm the COO at the Copper Mark. Next slide. The Copper Mark is an assurance framework. That means that we have standards, we have an assurance process and monitoring and evaluation, all sorts of parts of the organization that feed into ultimately the end of the day, a site receiving the Copper Mark. You'll also notice here that we also have the molybdenum mark, the nickel mark, and the zinc mark. This was a natural evolution that I'll talk about in just a moment, but essentially we did start as just copper, the idea being to look at responsible production within the copper value chain. And that expanded to these other metals that are also often co-produced with copper. Our model focuses on inclusion of various different types of stakeholders within our governance model, transparency, both in our processes, but also in the results, a comprehensive set of standards, which I will go through in more detail today, and a very robust assurance process that is used to conduct assessments against each of those standards. Next slide. We are, in fact, evolving. As you heard from Josephine earlier on, we do have our current vision, which is a world where mineral and metal products are made responsibly as the foundation of a sustainable future. And our mission is to apply credible standards and robust assurance at sites where mineral and metal products are mined, fabricated, transformed, and recycled. The idea here is really to grow and pursue our evolved vision and mission, which is, of course, just beyond just copper, but we do really use an integrated approach so that we can drive positive change on the ground that respects human rights, benefits communities, and protects environments, strengthen the value chain transparency to connect responsible actors, and complement existing initiatives by addressing gaps in the value chain. So our goal really is not to be too duplicative, but to fill in where there are gaps. And as part of this process, I will speak in more detail about this. The Copper Mark will have a new name and a new board and be the secretariat for the consolidated mining standard about which Josephine spoke earlier. Next slide. What does this all mean in that evolution here? The idea first and foremost is to really scale up all the activities by bringing more than just copper into the value chains, overseeing implementation of the consolidated mining standard, which is now under development with the partners, as Josephine mentioned, our midstream standard, which is under development, I'll talk about that, and our updated chain of custody standard. We are looking to distinguish responsible producers across the value chain and really strengthen those vertical connections between them. And this is done through transparency as well as organizations gathering together, so opportunities, a forum for discussion as well between the different actors. Often there's a big disconnect between upstream and downstream. The expectations of downstream maybe are not fully aligned with what's possible from the upstream, and likely what the upstream feels they can or should do is not aligned with the expectations of the downstream. So trying to convene all those actors together so that we can come to some agreement and push these initiatives forward. We are going to have a 17-person board. This is currently underway. We have announced our independent chair. And the idea here is really to have more space for stakeholder voices, have a balance of decision making between both mining and value chain stakeholders, as well as industry and non-industry stakeholders. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we're going to have a new name and a new brand, which will be coming shortly, likely around September. Next slide. All right, I really wanted to talk today more about our standards and how that process works. We do have a standard a standard development process. that has some really key elements that I think are also valuable just for this discussion with this group of people as we're talking about things like not duplicating. The first thing that you would see in our process is the requirement to map what already exists, prioritize, and really try to avoid duplication. If we are developing a new standard, there has to be a good justification as to why this is needed and why it doesn't duplicate existing efforts or complements some existing efforts. We then publish the intent, we put forward a terms of reference, we have technical groups with stakeholders representing various perspectives that then participate in the actual drafting of those standards and have the discussions about what is the material issues that come up. We always do two public consultations, one of 60 days and usually a second one of 30 days. Those are also in place, at least one public consultation when we do a revision. There is an emphasis within our process here to reach underrepresented stakeholders. And then approval at the end of the day is done by our advisory council, which is a group of representatives from various backgrounds, including human rights, environment, indigenous peoples, as well as industry, various parts of the value chain, downstream, midstream, upstream, and our board of directors. There is more information. We always publish what is upcoming as well as what's already been consulted on our website with the link that's provided here. And next slide. So as you'll see here, we have some evolved activities across the value chain, but there is a really heavy emphasis on reaching the full value chain from the upstream all the way to the downstream. So you have a simplified value chain here of what it looks like, especially in copper as the example that goes from exploration, mining, and processing all the way down to distribution and sales. And where we sit really is past exploration. So we're already in the mining and processing part. And then using our chain of custody standard can reach the distribution and sales part of this. And everybody in between has some element here to which they are connected. So our current process is that we have the RRA Criteria Guide 3.0. That's the risk readiness assessment, which is a tool developed with the Responsible Minerals Initiative. You'll be hearing from them later on today. And that is the basis of our current ESG, environmental, social, and governance standard. That is what is against which we assure sites that go from mining all the way up to fabrication. So where the product itself is actually done being modified and then goes into other products, right? So once you stop sort of manipulating the metal itself, it goes to other systems, other sort of factory level assessments, things like the RBA's VAP or a SMETA audit, et cetera. But we work with them with the metal processing up to that point. In the future, this will become two separate standards. One is the Consolidated Mining Standard, which will have a new name, I promise, and the Midstream Standard, which will also have a new name. And the idea then is that we're still covering this whole part of the value chain, but it is distinguished by those two different parts of the value chain. We then have our joint due diligence standard, which is primarily focused on responsible sourcing in alignment with the OECD due diligence guidance for the responsible sourcing of minerals from conflict affected and high risk areas, and our chain of custody standard, which connects the dots between sites that already have right now the copper mark until it gets to those end users. Next slide. So here is just another very helpful, I think, chart to show exactly what that evolution is going to look like. The idea is that we're retaining the full scope that we've already been using. However, instead of focusing on just copper, molybdenum, nickel, and zinc for the mine, smelter, refiner, that will be metal agnostic. We are retaining that for now for the downstream, for the midstream standard, and for the chain of custody standard. So that we can really focus on those specific value chains where there is that gap and where there's that co-production. And so that is the main change. That'll be the split. The joint due diligence standard will remain the same. although it will go through a revision next year. And we've just revised our chain of custody standard to extend beyond copper to the other three metals as well, and to allow for some other functionalities within how the chain of custody standard works itself. You can see here then just what are those different operations, what are the metals, and what is the standard that will be applied. Right now, we have 135 participating sites within the copper mark, right? So those are sites that are seeking the copper mark, the nickel mark, the molybdenum mark, and or the nickel mark. These are all using one standard and one assurance process. And the only difference is that depending on the products they produce, they may receive one or more of those assurance I hate to say certificate because it's not a certification, but those awards at the end of the day. Of those, about 48% are actually not mining. So they're smelters, refiners, semis fabricators, and fabricators. Our process is site-based. And so even though we work with some big companies, not all of their sites are participating. And then we do operate globally. And again, because our focus was initially on copper, we cover about 40% of the world's copper and 80% of the copper coming out of Chile, which is the world's #1 producer of copper. In addition to that, we have about 30 sites that only do an assessment against the joint due diligence standard, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. Next slide. Great. So I'd like to focus first on the RRA. This is the risk readiness assessment, and we are talking about the criteria guide version 3. This is just very high level, but to help understand the basis of this standard, it's important to see the structural breakdown. So this looks at environment, social criteria, and governance criteria, and is very heavily based in the 6-step due diligence process outlined by the OECD. And here I'm talking about the broader responsible business conduct, not just the minerals due diligence guidance, and the UN guiding principles, respect and remedy. There are these 33 criteria. It is translated into 5 different languages and uses one criteria guide. And next slide. Here you can see all of those criteria as they are broken down. So again, covering the majority of the criteria that one would expect for these types of operations. What's interesting about the RRA criteria guide is that it does start with a foundation of governance criteria that are both seen at a sort of site level, at that broader level, but also are integrated into each of the social and environmental criteria. So for example, management system looks at, does the site have a system to manage broadly their environmental, social governance issues? But also, if you were to look in emergency preparedness or water stewardship, you would see a requirement for a management system in that particular area. The same is true for grievance mechanism. Is there a grievance mechanism broadly that covers all of the issues that may come up, but also you'll see in each of the criteria that it says, and also you need to have a grievance mechanism. It doesn't mean that you need a separate grievance mechanism, but a reminder that these elements need to be in the grievance mechanism. And so this is our main standard. This is our environmental social governance standard. It uses the Copper Mark assurance process. A site can be awarded the Copper Mark or one of the other marks should they be at least partially meets for each of these. And that is contingent upon closing out any gaps within 24 months of signing up. So not from the assessment date, but from the day they actually sign up. They have to commit to and then actually implement and have reassessed those criteria so that they are fully meets for all of them at the end of 24 months. If not, they do lose the Copper Mark. This has happened, and we have had sites that have either withdrawn or have been suspended or removed from the program because of that. Next slide. The RRA, as I mentioned, will be retired, as will the ICMM principles and the other standards that are involved in the development, of the Consolidated Mining Standard Initiative. This effort is one that is done with the ICMM, the International Council for Mining and Metals, towards sustainable mining, which is an initiative of the Mining Association of Canada, and the World Gold Council. The idea here is to simplify the standards landscape, as right now all four of these organizations have their own standard that is applicable to mining that covers environmental, social, and governance issues. And there's a number of companies, for example, who do all four or three of the four, right? And so we're trying to simplify that. This is also in response to policymakers who are looking to either regulate, in particular in the European Union, or develop their own responsible mining standard. And you'll see here we've got ISO as an example, the International Standards Organization. The idea is also to build greater trust in the mining standards by including a range of stakeholders and having that consolidated standard developed with a broad set of stakeholder input that's overseen by this multi-stakeholder governance model. The hope is to reduce the costs and time for implementing companies and encourage more companies to follow recognized responsible mining standards. So our theory of change is really to rising tides raise all boats. And the hope is that we can encourage the majority of the mining, smelting, refining companies in the world to participate in this. And by doing so, we'll make sure that everybody can start to be more responsible using a continual improvement model. And then finally, connecting the value chain. As I mentioned, we are more than just mining. We really are focused on the full value chain, especially when we think of copper, nickel, zinc, and molybdenum. And the idea then is to make sure that this standard in particular is able to support the needs of customers, regulators, and others who are looking for transparency and information on responsibly produced materials. Next slide. The consolidated mining standard has 24 performance areas. So you'll have noted that the RRA criteria guide had 33. These have been consolidated, as everything is within the consolidated mining standard, to 24. But again, the areas are very similar. We're looking at ethical business practices, worker and social safeguards, social performance, and environmental stewardship. They also have a 3-level approach so that you can, for each of these, reach towards good practice, or leading practice. And in this way, we're really trying to promote this idea of a stepwise approach to meeting best practice in the space and the leading practice. And of course, this standard, as all others, will be continuously revised to meet the ever-changing market expectations, which means the bar is raised approximately every 5 years. Next slide. The midstream standard then is again intended to cover the other part of the value chain that we at the Copper Mark already cover, but is not in scope for the consolidated mining standard. So while CMSI will focus on mining, smelting, and refining, the midstream facilities needed their own fit for purpose standard, and that here is what we are working on. We want to maintain a credible ESG assurance for those types of operations. And again, this is meant to support the customer and regulatory expectations and connect all of those dots within the value chain. The next slide. So these are a little bit hard to read. They're a bit small here, but the midstream standard, like the consolidated mining standard, have 24 criteria that range across environmental, social, governance areas that look at internal labor practices as well as stakeholder community and stakeholder engagement. Also cover things like management systems, sustainability reporting, environmental issues. I am excited about this because we just launched the first version for a public consultation, the first of 2, and we would love to hear from all of you. I've included the link here, so if we get the slides afterwards, you'll be able to access that, and that is open until mid-August of this year. Once we receive that, it goes back to this technical committee to incorporate the feedback, and then goes a second draft will be provided for a second public consultation. The next slide. The Joint Due Diligence Standard was developed in partnership with the International Lead Association, the International Zinc Association, the Nickel Institute, and the Responsible Minerals Initiative, and later joined by the International Molybdenum Association. The original purpose here was really to support a coordinated response to responsible sourcing challenges. The London Metal Exchange had a requirement for responsible sourcing, and the purpose of this was really to provide an option for some of these metals that did not at the time have another standard that they could use to demonstrate their compliance with those responsible sourcing requirements of the London Metal Exchange. This is a independently audited and 100% OECD aligned standard. That includes not just looking at the standard, but also at its implementation. And you can see the full report for that on our website. And it has then, as a result, been approved by London Metal Exchange as a Track A standard, which, to jump through all the jargon, just means that they can use that to demonstrate their conformance with the responsible sourcing requirements. The intention here is to, if for any company that has, or any site, excuse me, that has copper, lead, nickel, zinc, molybdenum, or in this case also, oh, I said lead, they can undergo this assessment. It is still a site assessment, so it will cover all of the metals produced. And so as long as they have one of those 5 metals in production, then they can use it to cover their whole systems at that site. And next slide. All right, good. This one has a lot on here as well, but we did just update our chain of custody standard. As I mentioned, the purpose of this update was really to integrate other metals. It has been designed generally to be metals agnostic, but because of our focus within the organization on copper, nickel, molybdenum, and zinc, we now extended the chain of custody standard to those metal supply chains as well. This is also intended to support the efforts of the relevant ESG standards. So the idea isn't that you can just get chain of custody. You do have to first have the copper mark or the nickel mark in order to participate and pass this information along through the value chain. So as I mentioned earlier, it does connect sites that have the copper mark and the chain of custody with other sites that have the copper mark and the chain of custody. And through that, there is a level of traceability within the value chain. Now, that said, it does use primarily a mass balance approach. There's an option to use separation, but primarily because of the way that metals are processed in real life, it's very difficult to completely separate materials. Instead, what happens is they get mixed together, right? And so we allow for a mass balance approach, which means you have to reconcile materials in with materials out. And in so doing, you can make certain limited claims related to the material itself. So the result of the chain of custody standard is a product level claim as compared to the other standards, which allow for a site-based claim. Next slide. All right, I think this is my last slide here, but I did just want to mention this evolved governance model as it does relate to all of the activities in which we're engaged, including, and most importantly here, our stakeholder engagement and ensuring we have those various voices in our governance. So there is an independent chair, and then as you look at this, you'll see that there's a division. It's meant to be through these colors here, where there are 8 seats that are dedicated to mining specifically, and 8 seats that are dedicated to the value chain. And then within each of those 8 seats, there are 4 seats that are dedicated to the industry and 4 seats that are dedicated to stakeholders. And there are specific requirements there, whether it's labor or indigenous peoples, et cetera, environmental rights. After that, you also then have two committees. One is a mining committee and one is a value chain committee. And those committees will be responsible for more of the day-to-day operations, writing the standards that are relevant, developing the tools, etc. And national multi-interest panels. These are meant to be um, regional or national, as the name suggests, panels that are able to provide guidance for implementation um, within the national context. So, for example, we constantly come up against specific instances within a geography that require some additional guidance. One recent example is that within Chile, there is a actual legal requirement to charge employees who are not using their PPE, their personal protective equipment. And that is something that was really helpful for us to understand and provide guidance, for example, to the assessors, because we have a requirement that you cannot penalize through wages a your employees, right? You cannot do disciplinary actions through withholding wages. So understanding that there was a legal requirement to charge, we were able to then say, totally fine. Of course, you need to follow the legal requirement, but you should do so not through deductions from the wages. You need to do them separately, and that's how you can meet the objectives of the standard and those requirements. That's just one example, but we know that there are plenty of them out there, and these national panels will help to situate these global standards within the domestic context. So I'm going to leave you all there. Again, more than happy to answer questions here via email. And yeah, looking forward to the conversation. Thank you so much.